as America secured that French alliance.
You know, I think we sort of have this image of Franklin, as
Yeah.
this kind of lone figure charming his way through Paris. But
Right.
when we really dig into Schiff's book, we find that the situation was much more intricate and messy.
So not just champagne and witty comments, huh?
Not just that, no.
It sounds like there were spies, backroom deals,
Yeah,
clashes between American leaders. Even.
precisely, yeah.
So the book highlights how Franklin, Washington, and Adams, these key figures,
Yeah,
didn't always see eye to eye on how to achieve victory.
right.
Let's break that down.
Okay.
What were their different views?
So, Washington, who was focused on military independence, wanted to win the war without French troops on American soil. Adams wanted to avoid any kind of political entanglement with France and prioritize a clean break.
Right.
But for Franklin, winning the war was paramount, no matter what the means.
So it's almost like Franklin embraced the idea of America as a nation
Yes.
before it was even fully formed.
Exactly.
Like he saw the potential when others were just thinking about the immediate challenges.
Yes, he really understood that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to be pragmatic, prioritize the long-term goal,
Yeah.
even if that requires unconventional alliances or compromises.
And speaking of unconventional, this pragmatic approach is very apparent when we look at the propaganda war
Uh-huh.
that was going on alongside the actual fighting.
Oh, yeah, it was intense.
So both the British and the Americans were really battling for the French public's opinion,
Yeah.
using any tactic they could think of.
Right.
Now remember, this is the 1770s. There's no internet,
No,
no social media or anything.
no.
But that battle for hearts and minds, that was just as fierce back then.
Totally. And Schiff shares this anecdote where Franklin, in order to kind of bolster French confidence, downplays American struggles.
Right.
He basically paints this rosy picture of the American army,
Yeah.
claims they're in fine shape,
Uh-huh.
while Washington was actually facing defeat after defeat.
That's a pretty bold move.
It is, yeah.
I mean, where is the line between diplomacy and deception,
Yeah, well, this incident, it speaks to a larger point,
Yeah.
which is that controlling information during wartime, it's critical,
Wow.
even if it means kind of manipulating perceptions.
And this really hasn't changed much, has it?
Not at all. We still see information warfare playing out
Yeah,
today.
still on different platforms.
Oh, that's right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But Franklin wasn't alone in this web of secrets and strategic maneuvers.
No.
And the book introduces us to this fascinating character, Pierre-Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais.
Oh, Beaumarchais.
What a name.
The playwright turned arms dealer.
Wow.
Larger than life doesn't even begin to describe him.
So what was his role in all of this?
Beaumarchais, he was essential in providing those crucial supplies to the Americans,
Uh-huh.
all while keeping everything super secret.
Right?
He was using code names, these elaborate schemes.
Wow.
I mean, it really reads like a spy thriller.
I can imagine.
Imagine, one moment he's directing rehearsals for The Barber of Seville.
Right.
The next, he's coordinating covert arms shipments.
That's wild.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It is. The contrast is amazing.
Yeah.
So, speaking of captivating figures, let's talk about Franklin arriving in Paris.
Okay.
The book describes it as a complete media frenzy.
It's true.
So Parisian society at that time was all about flamboyance
Yes.
and grandeur.
Right.
And then you have Franklin
Uh-huh.
with his unassuming attire,
Yeah.
simple demeanor,
Right, yeah.
and he becomes this instant sensation.
Yeah, like the opposite of everyone else.
So his simplicity became his trademark, his
Covert.
way of standing out.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but it worked.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, Schiff tells these amusing anecdotes about Franklin's social faux pas,
Oh, I love these.
like applauding himself in the theater,
Yeah,
and maybe even attacking asparagus with his fingers.
it's great.
It's amazing these little details just humanize him.
They do.
They remind us that even these historical figures,
Yeah.
they had these relatable human moments.
Exactly.
But tell me about the move to Passy.
Okay.
Why move to the outskirts of Paris?
Well, that move was strategic for a few reasons.
Okay.
It got him away from the constant spies.
Uh-huh.
It got him closer to Versailles.
Oh, the heart of power?
Exactly. And it was convenient for the business interests of Franklin's host, Jacques Donatien Leray de Chaumont.
Wait, Chaumont.
Yes.
Wasn't he involved in supplying the Americans?
He was.
It's like quite a coincidence.
It does. And Schiff suggests that Chaumont may have even been using his position as Franklin's landlord to get information,
Really?
maybe even eavesdropping on him.
It's like a real-life spy novel, isn't it?
So, intrigue aside,
Okay.
Let's talk about Franklin's charm offensive. He
Right.
wasn't just blending in.
Yo.
He was winning people over.
Yep.
Influential figures.
Right.
So the book describes his meeting with Voltaire.
Oh, wow.
This encounter between two giants of the Enlightenment.
Amazing.
What a meeting of minds that must have been.
Can you imagine?
So how did Franklin's charm compare to his fellow American commissioners?
Wow.
Like Arthur Lee, for example.
Arthur Lee was, well,
Yeah.
he was a man of sharp intellect, but he had a rather abrasive personality.
Okay.
He was known for his suspicions, his bluntness.
So very different from Franklin.
Very different.
So it sounds like the success of the mission,
Yes.
it didn't just depend on diplomacy with the French,
Right.
but also managing their own internal dynamics.
Right, exactly.
So negotiating the Treaty of Alliance,
Yeah.
that must have been a real balancing act.
Absolutely. The French foreign minister, the Comte de Vergennes,
Yeah.
he was very calm.
He was eager to support the Americans,
Okay.
but he didn't want to provoke England too soon.
He was walking a tightrope.
He was.
So it wasn't just France jumping in with both feet right away.
No, there were definitely strategic considerations.
So the book talks about this secret meeting
Yes.
where Girard, Vergennes' undersecretary, presents the French proposal
Yeah,
to the American commissioners.
it was a tense time.
It really shows how cautious everyone was.
Yeah.
But even with these shared goals,
Uh-huh.
there was still a lot of mistrust
Yeah.
and these hidden agendas.
Right.
So how did the Americans manage their own internal problems?
Unfortunately, they weren't immune to discord.
Right?
The book shows us this growing rift between Franklin and Arthur Lee.
Uh-oh.
Lee was accusing Franklin of financial mismanagement
Oh, wow.
and favoritism.
So there were problems on the American side as well.
There were.
How did all this affect their mission?
Well, it definitely created an atmosphere of suspicion, and it threatened their relationship with the French,
Right.
and things would only get more intense as the mission went on.
So Franklin was dealing with challenges from both sides,
He was.
from inside the American camp and outside.
Exactly.
And this led to more controversy for him?
It did.
Criticism?
Yeah.
From both France and America?
Right.
One example is Franklin's authorization of privateering raids on British ships. So American ships attacking British ships
Yeah.
with Franklin's approval.
Yes.
What were the consequences of that?
Well, this move really angered the British,
I bet.
and it put Vergennes in a tough spot.
Right, because he was trying to stay neutral.
Yeah. But secretly helping.
So Franklin's decision,
Yeah.
it really complicated an already delicate situation.
It did. It added another layer.
Seems like everything had these ripple effects.
It did, both intended and unintended.
This is diplomacy for you.
It is.
A dance of strategy,
Mm-hmm.
risk, consequence.
That's right.
Franklin was definitely right in the middle of it all.
He was.
We'll be back to dig even deeper into this story.
Okay.
You don't want to miss it.
I'll be here. You know, when we talk about Franklin's legacy in France,
Yeah.
it's a real mix of admiration and controversy,
Yeah.
even during his time there.
Yeah.
And in the years after,
Right.
his image went through a kind of evolution.
Like this duality, right?
Yeah.
You have these stories of him charming everyone in Paris with his wit and his simple way of doing things.
Yeah.
But then you also have these accusations
Yes.
of financial problems, you know, and people saying he was maybe too trusting of the French.
Exactly.
So it's not just about different perspectives.
Yeah.
It's also about how politics
Yeah.
and rivalries
Uh-huh.
can affect how history is told.
Absolutely. Take Arthur Lee, for example.
Right, we talked about
He
that.
was very critical of Franklin
Yeah.
during their time in France and after.
So what do you think about their dynamic? Was it just professional?
Well-
Or was there something personal going on too?
I think it went beyond just disagreeing about policy.
Yeah.
Lee seemed convinced that Franklin was corrupt, maybe even incompetent.
Wow.
And he told everyone, including people in Congress.
Mm.
But you also have to consider Lee's personality.
Right.
He was known to be, well,
Yeah.
difficult,
Uh-huh.
suspicious of people.
So maybe some of his accusations
Yeah.
were fueled by jealousy or resentment.
It's possible.
It's amazing how these personal things
Um,
can play out on such a big stage.
It shows that history is rarely completely objective.
Right.
It's shaped by the people who write it.
And they have their own biases
Of course.
and motivation.
And agendas.
So how do we sort through all of this
Yeah.
to get a clearer picture of Franklin's impact?
It's definitely a challenge.
Like a puzzle with missing pieces.
It is, but that's part of what makes history so interesting.
You're right.
We have to look closely at the source, really think about the evidence, and accept that there might not be one right answer.
Sometimes the questions that are left unanswered
Yes,
are the most interesting.
I think so.
So we have to embrace the complexity.
Right.
Understand that even someone like Franklin
Yeah.
was just a human being
Mm.
in this messy and complicated time.
Exactly. He was a product of his time,
All right.
shaped by everything going on around him.
We can't judge him by today's standards or
Nope.
expect him to have all the answers.
No.
So we can admire what he did,
Yeah.
but also acknowledge the mistakes,
Right.
the controversies.
And the questions.
Right, about power, diplomacy, human nature even.
Exactly. I think the book encourages us to really think critically about history,
Yeah.
to question the simple stories we've been told,
Mhm.
and grapple with the reality of the past.
And speaking of reality,
Yeah.
the book also paints a picture of life in Paris back then.
Right.
It wasn't all fancy parties and intellectual debates.
No, not at all.
Paris was a city of extremes.
Yes.
You had incredible wealth,
Mm-hmm.
but also terrible poverty.
Right.
The streets were often filthy.
Mm.
The air was full of bad smells.
So even during these romanticized periods,
Yeah,
daily life could be pretty tough.
it could.
Often focus on the grand things
Uh-huh.
and forget about the everyday struggle.
That's true.
It must have been quite a shock for someone like Franklin,
Oh, definitely.
coming from a much simpler life in America.
It's fascinating to see how he adapted,
Yeah.
how he embraced the good parts,
Uh-huh.
but also dealt with the difficulties.
So he's navigating this complex social scene,
Right.
attending these fancy dinners,
Yeah.
charming the elite.
But he also complained
Yeah.
about all the interruptions, all the
Right.
people asking for favor.
Or trying to sell him things.
Exactly.
Sounds exhausting.
It does.
But even with all that, he
Yeah.
still made time for his intellectual pursuits.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
experiments,
Yeah.
the discussions. His interests were so wide-ranging.
Right, from ballooning to mesmerism to corn.
He always wanted to learn new things.
Yeah.
And he could connect ideas from different fields.
Even in the middle of diplomatic chaos,
I know.
his mind was always working.
Always.
He never stopped learning or experimenting.
It's a key part of his legacy.
Yeah.
As a scientist, an inventor,
And an intellectual.
he wasn't just a diplomat.
Right.
He was a polymath.
He did so many things well.
He did.
And as we mentioned earlier,
Uh-huh.
his scientific curiosity sometimes got him into trouble,
It did.
like with the Mesmer investigation.
Right. That episode is so interesting.
Yeah.
It shows that even someone like Franklin
Uh-huh.
could be influenced by trends
Yes.
and make decisions that seem wrong in hindsight.
Yeah. To be fair, mesmerism was incredibly popular in Paris then.
Like a historical version of something going viral today.
Exactly.
It reminds us that even the smartest people
Yes.
can fall for fads
Uh-huh.
or get caught up in something new, especially if it promises to change the world.
It makes you wonder what things we believe today
I know.
will seem crazy to people in the future.
I'm sure there are many.
History is full of examples
Yes.
of ideas that were once revolutionary,
Uh-huh.
but now seem ridiculous.
Yeah. It teaches us to be skeptical
Right.
and be open to changing our minds.
When new evidence comes along,
Exactly.
it's about being humble
Yeah.
and admitting we don't know everything.
But getting back to Franklin,
Okay.
towards the end of his time in France,
Yeah.
he seems to become disillusioned
Really?
with European politics.
Hmm.
He starts talking about how much he misses the simplicity of American life.
Like he wants to go home.
Yes, and he even writes an essay,
Oh.
kind of a cautionary tale
Huh?
for Europeans who are romanticizing the New World.
What was he saying?
He's basically saying America isn't perfect.
Yeah.
It's not a utopia.
Right.
He talks about the importance of hard work,
Uh-huh.
frugality,
Hmm.
self-reliant.
A more realistic view.
Yes, very much in line with his own values.
It's like his time abroad made him appreciate those values even more.
Like a return to his roots.
So he goes to France to get support for a revolution
Yeah?
and ends up rediscovering what he loves about his own country.
Yeah.
And after all those years in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
he finally goes back to America.
He does.
What was it like for him when he got back?
It was a real celebration,
I can imagine.
but also a little bittersweet.
Oh.
He was a hero,
Uh-huh.
but he was older,
Right.
tired from his travels,
And all the responsibilities.
and some of the problems from France followed him home.
So even in retirement,
Yes,
he couldn't escape the drama.
not entirely.
What kind of challenges did he face back in America?
Well, he had to deal with the fallout from Lee's accusations.
Right.
They were still going around.
And hurting his reputation.
Yes, and there were also disagreements in the government
Yeah?
about how to handle relations with France.
And other European powers.
It shows that even after independence,
Yeah.
there were still worries about foreign influence and the potential for corruption.
So Franklin's story is really about that journey.
It is.
With all the ups and downs.
Yes.
He represents American ingenuity.
Diplomatic skill.
But he also reminds us
Yeah.
that even the most famous people are just human.
Right.
They make
They're
mistakes.
shaped by their time.
I think that's a perfect way to sum it up.
I do too.
His life shows us the power of curiosity,
Yeah.
the importance of adapting, and the challenge of balancing your own goals
Right.
with doing what's best for everyone.
It's a story that still means something today.
It does.
Gives us insights into leadership, diplomacy.
And just being human.
And now, we'll wrap up our deep dive
Okay.
into Franklin's fascinating
Yeah.
and often surprising journey in France. As we get deeper into Franklin's story,
Yeah.
this idea of him being a bridge between two worlds, it really sticks with me.
It makes sense. He was dealing with this brand new American Republic.
Right. Still figuring things out.
And then the extravagance of the French court.
Two very different worlds.
And it wasn't just about explaining America to the French.
Right.
He was also explaining France to Americans.
Yeah. Through his writing,
His letters, essays, those stories we talked about.
it all shaped how Americans saw France.
And how they saw France's role in their fight.
Exactly.
So his writing was really important.
It was. He was a brilliant communicator.
He really was.
He created this picture of France that was both appealing and a little bit warning.
Like, come here, but be careful.
Yeah, he showed them the French love of liberty, their support for America,
Right.
but also the dangers of extravagance,
Right.
courtly intrigue, and relying too much on other countries.
It's like he's saying, learn from France, but don't lose yourself.
Go lose your value.
And that's still relevant today.
It is.
We have our own relationships with other countries. We have to figure out how to manage them.
So Franklin's story reminds us.
Yeah.
Diplomacy is more than just treaties and meetings,
It's about building connections,
understanding each other,
finding ways to work together,
but also protecting what's important to you
finding that balance,
between collaboration and independence.
which Franklin seemed to do naturally.
He did. It takes a lot of skill
Yeah.
to understand people,
Uh-huh.
their motivations,
And use that knowledge.
to your advantage.
He was also very good at adapting
Yes, changing his style.
to fit the situation.
It makes you wonder
Yeah.
how much of his success was because of who he was,
His personality?
his charm, wit, curiosity.
Do you think someone like Arthur Lee could have done what Franklin did?
That's hard to say.
Yeah.
But Franklin's personality was definitely a big help.
I can see that.
He could connect with people,
Yeah.
make them feel at ease,
Right.
make them feel part of something bigger,
That's so important for building trust.
especially in diplomacy.
We often focus on the big events.
Right.
The wars, the treaties.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's the personal connections
Some relationships
that really matter.
that change the course of history.
I think that's one of the book's most important points.
I agree.
History is about people,
Mm-hmm.
their connections,
And the choices they make.
which shape the world we live in today.
Exactly. And Franklin's life.
Yeah.
It's a great example of that.
He wasn't just a statesman.
Right.
He was a scientist,
Uh-huh.
an inventor,
A writer.
a husband, a father.
A friend.
All of that makes him who he was.
And it all contributed to his impact.
We're seeing the whole person.
Not just a name in a history book.
And that makes his story even more interesting
It does.
because we can relate to him,
To his struggles
his triumphs.
and his flaws.
That's what makes Schiff's book so powerful.
Yeah.
Shows us that history isn't just facts and dates,
It's a story.
about people
Their relationship.
and the choices that shape our world.
And speaking of choices,
Yeah,
Franklin was willing to make tough decisions,
he was.
even when they were unpopular.
Like supporting those privateering raids.
That caused problems with Vergennes.
And risk the alliance.
But it shows his pragmatism,
He always put America first.
even if it meant breaking the rules.
Or making people angry.
He understood that leadership means making tough choices,
Sometimes.
even when there are consequences.
So being a leader isn't always about being liked.
No.
It's about doing what needs to be done.
And explaining why.
Convincing others.
Franklin was very good at that,
It was.
both in his writing
Uh-huh.
and in person.
He understood the power of words
He did,
to change how people think.
and influence what happens.
So as we wrap up,
Okay.
What's the one thing you want listeners to take away?
I want them to remember
Yeah.
that history is about people, their relationships.
And their choices.
Franklin's life shows us that.
It's a reminder
Yeah.
that even the most famous people were human.
They made mistakes,
They were shaped by their time.
but they made choices that changed the world.
That's a great way to put it.
I think so.
Their stories can inspire us,
Challenge us,
remind us that the past,
is still with us,
we have to learn from it
understand it.
and use it to build a better future.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us
It's been my pleasure.
for this amazing look at Franklin and France.
I've enjoyed it.
And to our listeners,
Yeah.
keep exploring this time in history
It's fascinating.
and decide for yourselves what you think about Franklin's role.
There's so much to learn.
Until next time,
Yes.
keep diving deep,
Stay curious.
and we'll see you then.